ginhawa ang kanilang mga buhay. Sa amin pong mga itinalagang tingnan ang kapakanan at kinabukasan ng bawat Pilipino. Pagkalooban mo po kami ng lakas at tatag ng loob upang lalo pa namin mapagsilbihan ang aming mga kababayan sa lahat ng pagkakataon. Bigyan din po ninyo kami ng mapagpatawad na puso at isipan upang mapanatili ang pagkakasundo at pag-unawa sa bawat isa. Amin pong ipinagpapasalamat ang kaarawan ni Senadora Cynthia Villar ngayong araw na ito. Naway patuloy siyang maging isang huwarang ina, asawa at lingkod bayan. Patnubayan mo po kami, Panginoon, at dalangin namin na ilayo kami at ang bansang Pilipinas sa anumang kapamahakan. Ang lahat ng ito'y idinadalangin namin sa inyong Panginoon. Siya nawa.
Thank you very much, Senator Nancy. The Majority Leader. Roll call. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, shall we have the roll call?
The Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan, Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Smeña, Pimentel, Paul, Rector, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Trilon.
There are 13 senators present. The Chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, before the approval of the journal, we would like to acknowledge some guests in the gallery. First of all, the Afghan High Peace Council and peace activists. Their coordinator is Ms. Socorro Reyes.
The Afghan High Peace Council and peace activists is recognized and their presence is made of record.
Mr. President, we also have from Ateneo de Davao University, from AB Political Science, a group of students headed by Professor Ramon Beleno.
The Ateneo de Manila University AB Political Science, headed by Professor Ramon Beleno, is recognized and their presence is made of record.
Mr. President, we have some guests of Senator Lauren Legarda from my hometown of Concepcion, Tarlac, from Barangay San Agustin, Barangay Captain Agustin Cruz, Barangay Kagawads Arsenio Pineda, Dante Carion, Alvin Manlapig, Dominador Pangilinan, Purisima Reyes, Rolando Cabigting, Barangay Secretary Efren Jimenez, Barangay Treasurer Olivia Peralta, and from Barangay Santa Rosa, Captain Guido Malonzo and Kagawad Harwin Angeles, Mr. President.
The presence of the barangay officials from Barangay San Agustin in Concepcion and Barangay Santa Rosa in Concepcion are recognized.
Mr. President, we also have barangay captains of Dolores, Eastern Samar, led by ABC Chair Francesca Macias.
Barangay Captains of Eastern Samar, the Barangay Chairman of Dolores Eastern Samar is recognized.
Mr. President, special guests of Senator J.V. Ejercito, particularly his sister Jerica and brother Jacob, are also with us.
We recognize and make of record the presence of Jerica Ejercito and Jacob Ejercito, the sister and brother of Senator J.V. Ejercito.
Mr. President, Councilor Lex Tupas from Iloilo City is also here as my special guest.
Councilor Lex Tupas is recognized and his presence is made of record.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense of the reading of the journal of the second session, July 28, and consider the same as approved.
Before we do that, do I see Chairperson Herbosa of the SEC?
Yes, Mr. President, Chairman Herbosa is my guest as well for today.
We recognize and place of record the presence of Chairperson Tess Herbosa.
Mr. President, we have a standing motion for the approval of the to dispense with the reading of the journal of the second session and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? There being none, the reading of the journal of session number 2 on July 28, 2015 is hereby dispensed with and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I would like to inform the august body that today is the birthday of one of our colleagues, Senator Cynthia Villar, and may I ask for a 1-minute suspension to greet the good senator a very happy birthday.
We suspend the session for 1 minute to greet our colleague Senator Villar a happy birthday. Session suspended for 1 minute. Sana si Cynthia. Officially, you will be greeted again. Okay. See. Session is resumed.
Mr. President, the birthday girl is here and our colleagues have greeted her already. So, Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2851 entitled An Act Granting the Avocado Broadband Telecoms Inc. a franchise to construct, install, establish, operate, and maintain telecommunication systems throughout the Philippines, introduced by Senator Paulo Benigno Bam Aquino IV.
Rules.
Senate number 2582, an act establishing an on-site, in-city, or near-city resettlement program for informal settler families in accordance with the People's Plan and mandating relocating local government units to provide other basic services and livelihood components in favor of the recipient local government unit, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7279 as amended, otherwise known as the Urban Development and Housing Act of 1992, Senator Joseph Victoria Hercito.
Urban Planning, Housing, and Resettlement, Local Government.
Senate number 2853, an act to establish a task force against counterfeit drugs and to increase and strengthen government efforts against counterfeit drug crimes, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Human Rights, Health and Demography, Finance.
Senate number 2854, an act to prevent drug overdose-related deaths, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
Senate number 2855, an act to direct the Land Transportation Office to require the disclosure of information relating to the fair market value and safety of damaged motor vehicles, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services.
2856, an act requiring the placement of defibrillators in public use airports, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services.
Senate number 2857, an act merging the domestic and inter-country adoption law, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes, Women, Family Relations, Gender Equality, Finance.
Senate number 2858, an act to reduce poverty and promote human capital development through the creation of a national conditional fund transfer program, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development, Finance. Can we have a 1 minute suspension to allow our guests to sit down and keep some order, have some order in the hall. Let the secretaries do it.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Senate Number 2587, an act merging the domestic and inter-country adoption laws, Senator Defensor Santiago.
The Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes, Women, Family Relations, Gender Equality, and Finance.
Senate Number 2858, an act to reduce poverty and promote human capital development through the creation of a national conditional fund transfer program, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development, Finance.
Senate Number 2859, act establishing the Filipino identification system, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Recto.
Justice and Human Rights, Finance.
Senate Number 2860, an act mandating the annual public disclosure of all contingent liabilities incurred by all national government agencies, local government units, government-owned or controlled corporations, government financial institutions, and other government instrumentalities, Senator Recto.
Finance.
Resolution, Senate Joint Resolution Number 15. Joint Resolution constituting a Congressional Oversight Committee on Socialized and Low-Cost Housing Loan Restructuring and Condonation to review the implementation of Republic Act Number 9587, otherwise known as the Socialized and Low-Cost Housing Loan Restructuring and Condonation Act of 2008 by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
Rules.
Yes, Resolution Number 1415 directing the Senate Committee on Health and Demography and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the use of common hazardous household agents with the end in view of promoting and encouraging the use of eco-friendly alternatives, Senator Lapid.
Health and Demography.
PSR number 1416 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the report that urbanization is threatening the Ifugao Rice Terraces, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Education, Arts and Culture, Tourism.
PSR number 1417 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the impact of mining activities on the structural integrity of Angat Dam, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources, Public Works.
PSR number 1418 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the need to impose stricter penalties to prevent the proliferation of credit card schemers, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, Currencies, Public Order, Dangerous Drugs.
PSR number 1419 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported proliferation of skincare products with high levels of mercury content, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health, Demography, Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
PSR number 1420 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the need to immediately rehabilitate Angat Dam, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Works.
PSR number 1421 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation and the need for local government units to improve planning against dengue, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Local Government.
PSR number 1422 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the Commission on Audit Report questioning Davao City's 11,246 contractual workers in 2014, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Local Governments.
PSR 1423 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that 1 million senior citizens have no PhilHealth coverage, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
PSR 1424 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on reported budget cuts and privatization schemes under the Universal Health Program, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography.
PSR 1425 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that Taiwanese fishermen are dumping garbage in Amianan Island in Batanes by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources, Foreign Relations.
PSR 1426 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that a shipment of 4,200 endangered turtles was intercepted in Palawan, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources, Agriculture and Food.
PSR 1427 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the prevalence of counterfeit drugs in the country, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights, Health and Demography.
PSR number 1428 urging the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the state of food and nutrition security and persistent malnutrition situation in the Philippines by Senator Sani Angara.
Agriculture and Food, Health and Demography.
PSR number 1429 directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported need to improve power and communication services in Mindanao, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Energy, Public Services.
PSR number 1430, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the U.S. State Department report that the Philippines has a major problem in human rights. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Justice and Human Rights.
PSR number 1431, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the need to strengthen laws against the illegal practice of medicine. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Civil Service, Government Organizations, Health and Demography.
PSR 1432, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that some 300 people who sold mine land rights lost 40 million pesos to an investment scam. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
Yes, resolution number 1433, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that unregistered insecticides are being sold in the market without authorization from the Food and Drug Administration. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
PSR 1434, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that officials diverted funds for an important weapons deal to a non-priority procurement project. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Accountability of Public Officers and Investigation, National Defense, and Security and Finance.
PSR 1435, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that workers are against an increase in Social Security premiums. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Government corporations and public enterprises, labor, employment, human resource development.
PSR number 1436, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the new license plates issued by the LTO have failed the flood stress test. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public services.
PSR 1437, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation the recent COA audit report that the Food and Nutrition Research Institute failed to fully implement 3 major projects, resulting in the reversion of its cash allocations amounting to 133.48 million to the National Treasury. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Science and Technology.
PSR 1438, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that a resort is being built in Boracay, timberland, without an environmental clearance certificate by Senator Defensor Santiago.
Environment and Natural Resources.
PSR number 1439, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation and the need to empower barangays to fight dengue. Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Local Government.
PSR 1440, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid legislation over the issue on the dumping of toxic and hazardous waste from Canada. Senator Joseph Victory Hercito.
Environment, Natural Resources, Foreign Relations.
PSR number 1443, directing the Senate Committee on Public Services to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the feasibility of extending the validity of motor vehicle registration and driver's license with the end in view of reducing, if not completely eradicating, the incidence of red tape within the Land Transportation Office by Senator Recto.
Public Services.
Communications letter from the Office of the President of the Philippines transmitting to the Senate 2 regional copies of the following: Republic Act number 10662, entitled An Act naming stretch of the National Highway along the Iloilo Diversion Road, Iloilo Capiz Road Old Route, which begins at the junction of General Luna to the Airport Access Road and ends at the gate of the Iloilo International Airport, traversing the municipalities of Pavia, Santa Barbara, and Cabatuan in Iloilo City, as Senator Benigno S. Aquino Jr. Avenue. Republic Act number 10663, an act naming as the President Cruzan Aquino Avenue the circumferential road which commences at the junction of the Iloilo-Dumangas Coastal Road in Balabago, Haro District, Iloilo City, then follows a general westward direction along the floodways south bank towards Buhang Haro, Takas Haro, and Ungka to Pavia, then traverses southwards the Mandurrial District, Iloilo City, Pavia, San Miguel tri-border, and ends at the Iloilo Antique Road near the center of Arevalo District, Iloilo City. Republic Act number 10664, entitled An Act declaring the last full week of August as Armed Forces of the Filipino Week, and Republic Act number 10665, entitled An Act establishing the Open High School System in the Philippines and appropriating funds therefore, which were signed by His Excellency President Benigno S. Aquino III.
To the archives.
Additional reference of business message of the President of the Philippines, letter of His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III dated 8 July 2015, submitting for the Senate's consideration and concurrence the agreement between the Government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Government of the Republic of Indonesia concerning the delimitation of the exclusive economic zone boundary, which was signed on 23 May 2014 in Manila, Philippines.
Foreign Relations.
Messages from the House of Representatives, letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 27 July 2015 it adopted House Concurrent Resolution number 2 entitled Concurrent Resolution providing for the Senate and the House of Representatives to hold a joint session to hear the message of the President of the Republic of the Philippines, in which requesting concurrence of the Senate.
To the archives.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 27 July 2015 it adopted House Resolution number 195 entitled Resolution informing the Senate that the quorum being present, the House of Representatives has entered upon the exercise of its functions.
To the archives.
Communications, letters from the Office of the President of the Philippines transmitting to Senate two original copies of the following: RA number 10667, an act providing for a national competition policy prohibiting anti-competitive agreements, abuse of dominant position, and anti-competitive mergers and acquisitions, establishing the Philippine Competition Commission and appropriating funds therefore, and Republic Act number 10668, entitled an act allowing foreign vessels to transport and co-load foreign cargoes for domestic transshipment and for other purposes, which were signed by His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III.
To the archives.
Committee reports. Committee report number 187, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation on House number 703, introduced by Representative Tiangco, entitled an act dividing Barangay North Bay Boulevard South in the city of Navotas into three distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangays North Bay Boulevard South 1, North Bay Boulevard South 2, and North Bay Boulevard South 3, recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Marcos Jr.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 188, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government, Electoral Reforms, and People's Participation on House number 4570, introduced by Representative Tiangco, entitled an act dividing Barangay Tansa in the city of Navotas into two distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangay Tansa 1 and Barangay Tansa 2, recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Marcos Jr.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 189, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation on House number 4576, introduced by Representative Tiangco, entitled an act dividing Barangay Tangos in the city of Navotas into two distinct and independent barangays to be known as Barangay Tangos North and Barangay Tangos South, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Marcos Jr.
Calendar for ordinary business. The Majority Leader. We suspend the session for 1 minute, or
No, we're ready,
All
Mr. President. Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we recognize Senator Lauren Legarda to speak on a matter of public interest.
Senator Legarda is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. My brief message today is entitled, Why Do I Care? And this just happened a week ago in the Élysée Palace in Paris. Exactly a week ago, on July 21st, more than 40 religious, moral, environmental, cultural, and political leaders gathered in Paris for a summit of the consciences for the climate, convened by French President François Hollande and Nicolas Hulot, his advisor for the protection of the planet, and Hollande in the aftermath of his state visit to the Philippines in February, which highlighted the need for urgent global climate action. The summit is a prelude to the 21st Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP21, which will also be hosted by the French government in December this year. Why do I care for the planet? This was the question asked from each of the participants in the summit, including this representation, who was a lone delegate from the Philippines and a panelist speaker. Before we even talk about what nations must do to save the world from the threats of climate change and agree on a universal climate deal on greenhouse gas emissions, each of us should have a personal reflection on what we can do to contribute to protecting the planet. We can no longer delay action because that would mean tragedy for our children and our children's children. We are the custodians of the earth, stewards of its natural resources. It is our responsibility to ensure that future generations will continue to live in a green, healthy, and resilient world. If many are still not convinced why we should care for our planet, let me share with you why we should. And I would like to quote President Hollande. There are refugees of wars, refugees fleeing from terrorism, but there are also displaced and climate refugees, which I've been talking about for more than a decade in this hall, forced to leave their homes, to leave their villages, sometimes to separate from their families because it is no longer possible to live there and to feed themselves. That is what is at stake in Paris in December. This challenge is so great that it requires the mobilization of all. Former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan stressed that we must address climate change now for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. And I quote him, "We have the duty to bequeath to them a world where all of mankind lives in peace and harmony with nature." Irish President Michael Higgins warns, and I quote, that ours may be the final generation with the opportunity to effectively respond to the very urgent, uncontested effects of climate change. Prince Albert of Monaco said that we need a lifestyle change, one that does not prey on the Earth's resources and cause deterioration of our ecosystems, the land and the seas. He said, and I quote, "Fighting against climate change is to reconnect to authentic progress, progress which is shared among us all." Nicolas Hulot, Special Envoy of the French President for the Protection of the Climate, or of the Planet, who initiated a summit, said, and I quote, "Behind the general term of climate change, we have here a profound civilization and culture crisis. We have men, women, children who are waiting in despair for us to deal with the causes of their own suffering. The climate crisis is the ultimate injustice." Cardinal Peter Turkson, President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, stated, "The climate is a common goal belonging to all and meant for all. Yet the costs of climate change are being borne disproportionately by those least responsible for it and least able to adapt to it, who are the poor." France's Minister for Ecology, Ségolène Royal, said, and I quote, "Man is the only living being with a conscience, capable of expressing its conscience, but this means human beings have responsibility towards other living beings and the planet itself." Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, through a message delivered by Janos Pastor, Assistant Secretary General on Climate, said, and I quote, "Climate change is a defining challenge of our time. It affects us all, but it does not affect us all equally. We have a profound responsibility to protect and assist the world's poorest and most vulnerable people, and to pass on to future generations a planet that is thriving and healthy." Many more leaders of various faiths, religions, and cultural affiliations shared meaningful and powerful statements about the need to combat climate change. But I wish to stress the common messages during the said summit. First, climate change is one of the greatest challenges, if not the greatest, humanity is facing today. Second, in order to effectively combat climate change, we need to progressively decrease our dependence on fossil fuels, especially coal, and shift to renewable energy. Senator Sani Angara was correct in saying the other day that why have we approved more than 21 coal power plants, which in the next 10 or 15 years will make up more than 70% of our energy dependence. That is way beyond what the Department of Energy said, that indeed only 35% dependence on coal is the ideal energy mix. Finally, no effort will be successful unless all of us work together, not just governments, but businesses, civil society, and every individual in this planet. At the end of the summit, the call to consciences for the climate, which all the participants, including this representation, signed, was launched. and will be presented to each head of delegation at the COP21 in December. This document invites leaders attending COP21 to reflect and answer the question, why do I care? With the hope that they will come to the conference primarily as a conscious human being, not just a representative of a government or an agency. Mr. President, I was also able to share my views during the summit, and I said that the Philippines is indeed only a 0.3% emitter of carbon in the world, and yet, why are we one of the most vulnerable nations affected by extreme weather events caused by the changing climate? Being a vulnerable nation that has done the least to cause this vulnerability, we hope that the Philippines will be the first to show a positive outcome of the said summit. With that, I humbly declared my commitment to convince the President to convene a summit of consciences in the Philippines. I hope that we could all ask ourselves, why do I care? So that we can dig deeper in our mind, heart, and conscience. Because until we've taken it upon ourselves that the key to addressing climate change and its threats lies in each and every person's effort to be part of the solution, then the greatest challenge we will have to fight is our own apathy and our own indifference. Climate change goes beyond science, goes beyond partisan politics, goes beyond territorial boundaries. Inaction and apathy will spell death and loss. The state of our environment is precarious. We are in an ICU. We need a call of conscience. But while climate change is a complex challenge, it is not impossible to address. The solution can be found in each one of us. All we need is to be responsible and to take urgent action. We all need to embrace meaningful change. Change in the way we think. Change in the way we live. Change in the way we pursue the development and the future we all long for all of humanity. And let it be said, Mr. President, well gifted with conscience, with time, with influence and power, that we did our best and did our share in saving our environment, in saving our planet for the sake of our children. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ligarda. Senator Angara is recognized.
Mr. President, may I be permitted to ask a few questions? With the permission of the good lady senator, just a few questions.
Yes, it would be my pleasure to answer the questions of the good senator from Aurora, which is one of our wealthiest provinces in terms of natural resources, which is also very vulnerable because it is in the eye of a storm, literally and figuratively, every so often.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the chair of the Committees on Environment and Climate Change. I'd like to thank you for mentioning me, Mr. President. I'd also like to commend our good chair, not only for being friends with Academy Award-winning actress Marion Cotillard, French President François Hollande, but also because she was, as I like to say often, she was a warrior for the environment before it was considered en vogue or trendy to do so. So I commend the lady for her early awareness and taking up such an advocacy. My question is, how can we increase, you mentioned the low awareness level of our population despite being very vulnerable to climate change. What steps can we do to raise awareness among our population?
Thank you for that very basic question where we can operationalize these international conferences in our own communities, Mr. President. In fact, there are barangay captains in Kagawad now from Concepcion Tarlac, the hometown of our colleague, Senator Bam Aquino. Perhaps you can also do it in your own province. Perhaps Senator Pia and Senator Aran can also do it in Taguig, and many of our colleagues who have various strong constituencies. Yes, a replication of the Summit of Consciences for the Climate can be done in communities, in barangays, in cities and municipalities, in schools, Mr. President, where a gathering not only of politicians or for people in the academe, but various sectors can actually make their pledge and commitment towards the strict implementation and observance of our already enacted environmental laws. To name a few, our Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Solid Waste Management Law, and many others. Second, for us to actually assist our local governments in coming up with their local climate change action plan, which is actually part of the 2009 enacted Climate Change Act, which created a Commission on Climate Change. I believe that the National Action Plan on Climate Change has been done, but the local action plan of every city and municipality is not yet completed. Third, Mr. President, as simple as having a geohazard map in every city and municipality and following this in the construction of roads and bridges and schools and homes. If every developer, if every business entity would just follow the geohazard maps, which is readily available, uploaded online, as well as the hard copies, perhaps from the Mines and Geosciences Bureau of the DNR, if we would simply, in the Senate as an institution, decrease our consumption in terms of toning down our air conditioners when it's very cold and segregating garbage at source, recycling and composting in the respective offices. By mere planting organic vegetables and herbs in our backyards, even in recycled containers, Mr. President, doing this every day as a way of life can actually alleviate problems of health, problems emanating from our surroundings. At the same time, we can have our own small samples of adaptation and mitigation in the community level, like instituting low-tech early warning systems, not only for natural hazards like storms and typhoons, but also for earthquakes, which is not brought about by climate change, but which is considered a natural hazard. By joining in the Metro Manila-wide earthquake drill, which is timely, Mr. President. So there are many ways where we can operationalize this summit of consciences for climate, where we simply have to abide and be conscious of the laws that already exist.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's certainly a very substantial and practical laundry list of to-dos. And you mentioned the LGUs. So I know we have a solid waste management law, and yet I think we still have, compared to other countries, somewhat primitive ways of disposing of our wastes. We still do landfills, and it was in the news that we accepted the garbage from a foreign nation, which is, I think, is tragic. Is there? I know that the National Competitiveness Council does metrics or measurements of local government units in terms of their competitiveness, in terms of how fast they process business permits and things like that. Is there a comparative scorecard in terms of environmental compliance or adaptation to climate change? Are there any rankings, for example, by NGOs or by the government or any other or civil society organizations?
Yes. Mr. President, there are rankings in terms of the quality of air. There are rankings in terms of our water quality, and I believe that we have failed in all that. With regards to the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law, Mr. President, I'm glad you mentioned it. We have a model barangay, I believe, in Taguig, and Senator Pia, I think, knows that. It was her brother's barangay before. There are model barangays in Blue Ridge and in many other areas of the country. In short, if 1/4 or 25% of our local governments are actually compliant with that law, why can't the 3/4 or the 75% of our LGUs actually do that? So it is a doable law. You mentioned about sanitary landfills. Under the law, engineered sanitary landfills are not actually banned. It is open dumps which are banned, Mr. President, which is detrimental to our physical health. And that goes without saying. However, if we actually segregate waste at source, recycle and compost, and only those na tinatawag po nating residual waste or latak would actually go to the engineered sanitary landfill, we can actually have almost zero waste. And it's just a matter of being very conscious of this. So there's much that we could do. It's a matter of actually implementing it and being very strict about compliance.
Well, I suspect it's the lack of resources, perhaps, which prevents some of the LGUs from complying
You know,
And-
Mr. President, that's what they always say. But all the LGUs that you ask, like barangays in San Fernando City, as I mentioned, the barangay in the city of Taguig, let's say the barangay in Blue Ridge, and many others. I think there are barangays in the city of, in Batangas City, in the province of Batangas, which have become models as well. It is not a matter of resources. It is a matter of political will and the leadership and the people cooperating, because they can even gain more resources by reusing all the bottles and all the so-called wastage, which can be recycled as well. And so, it is a convenient excuse for those who don't have yung hindi mulat at yung tinatamad at yung ayaw sumunod sa batas. Madaling sabihin, hindi kaya dahil walang pera. Pero kung tignan po nyo, if you will notice, those who have complied with it and have won awards for it, you can see that it is a matter of enforcement and political will and not a matter of resources.
I'm certainly encouraged by the answer of the chair of the Environment Committee, and it certainly bodes well for the future if many leaders were as enlightened as her. I thank you for mentioning me with respect to renewable energy, because I was one of the supporters of that law during my time in the House, and my father was a big advocate, as you are now, of renewable energy. And you mentioned moving towards a 70% coal in terms of our energy mix. No, I've actually read somewhere that it's closer to 80%. It will be closer to 80% once we have all these big plants in Subic, in Mindanao, that will be online in maybe 2 to 3 years. My question is, what steps should we take to, now that we already have a law in place, the RE law, to have a more diversified mix? I realize, unlike hardcore advocates of renewable energy, that you have to have that baseline power load, which is provided by coal, which is not intermittent and is predictable. But what steps must we take going forward, Mr. President?
That's a very good question, and thank you for that. No less than 2 undersecretaries of the Department of Energy in 2 various hearings, Mr. President, already said that, yes, we need interventions so that what they approved and what the DNR approved, which will in a couple of years lead to a more than 70% reliance on coal, will be averted, meaning they realize it could be catastrophic for our country and bad for the population, including our women and children and all of us, and unhealthy and bad for business as well if this actually happens. And so these interventions is what we need to put our minds together for. What are these interventions so that those given service contracts, because they believe that their mandate is to provide power, but it must not be provide power at all costs. It should be not at the cost of the health and the welfare of our women and our children and all our vulnerable communities. And so whatever these interventions are, perhaps I may not have the answer now. We should have a stronger, more articulate push for renewables, whether it's wind or solar or whether hydro, etc. There should be more, a bigger push for renewables, stricter and effective implementation of the Renewable Energy Law of 2008, Mr. President.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm quite satisfied with the answers given by our Senator Legarda, the chair of the Committee on Environment and Climate Change, and I thank her for her graciousness in answering our questions.
Thank you, Senator Angara.
Mr. President, may we now refer the speech and the interpellations to the Committee on Climate Change. I so move.
So referred.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
they all there? Oh, yeah? Ay, Jay.
It's because the husbands know how to take care of them.
Brad, thank you.
Boss, thank you. Thank you, boss.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2752 under Committee Report number 130. This is the bill on microfinance NGOs, Mr. President.
Any objection hearing on consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that the sponsor had delivered his sponsorship speech last May 6. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period of interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, upon consultation with the minority leader and the secretariat, there are no members who have intimated their desire to interpellate at this time. So I move that we close the period of interpellation.
Any objection? The period for interpellation on Senate Bill 2752 under Committee Report 130 is terminated.
Mr. President, upon consultation with the Chairman, Senator Aquino, we will be taking up the amendments, possible committee amendments and then individual amendments next week. I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2752 under Committee Report number 130.
Consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, August 3, 2015.
Before the chair acts on the motion, chair wishes to place of record that on Monday, after the roll call, we will be having an all-senators caucus to receive the report in caucus of the Committee on Local Governments on the Bangsamoro Basic Law. Senator Marcos has informed the Senate President and the Senate President pro tempore that he will be submitting the committee report on the Bangsamoro Basic Law on Monday, August 3, and that is the reason why we are calling the caucus to consider this report in caucus before we submit it for plenary debates. So with that, we would request the office of the majority leader to so inform the office of Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr. of this the announcement of the Senate President, which is in accordance with our agreement.
Yes, Mr. President, and we will also inform all the offices of all the senators so that they will be aware that we will have a caucus after the opening of the session on Monday.
All right. So with that, we shall now act on the motion to adjourn. Any objection? Hearing none. The session is adjourned until Monday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2015.